Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for giving me some of your time this afternoon. That's what I want to talk about, right? Beyond automation, how we can use AI and all the different tools that exist already that have excellent features in them that utilize AI, and how we can hopefully take that, and as the people in the room who are many of the ones who come up with the concepts in the first place, how could we collaborate together to raise up and do this thing that we call remediation, that we call accessibility, faster, more effectively, because ultimately, access is a human right. So how can we step out from perhaps the corporate model, because ideas don't come from a vacuum. Right? How can we work together and collaborate? We have some amazing things that already exist. So I'm going to highlight certain tools that use AI in exceptional ways, really exciting features that are already in existence. We're going to talk about some things that happen with AI that it kind of are across the board that are still things we need to learn to work around, or things that we could improve upon that are in existence everywhere. And then hopefully have a conversation, and I've got some ideas and a model that I'm happy to produce for you here, but how do we do all of those things in the mindset of remediation as effectively, efficiently as possible, but then how do we go the next step further and make this work at an even greater level? Because when we do that, we have to remember our end user, right? Our end user is the one who is the child that gets to learn how to read. Our end user is the one who is the family that can sign up for housing assistance because the system was accessible and that online PDF form was something they could actually utilize. And so the agenda today, it's navigating human rights, compliance, budgets. We're going to talk about the legal landscape at a very high level. AI and automation, we'll talk about what those limits are that we kind of understand across the field. We're talking about also security and integrity, because those things are many times hand in hand with accessibility. The more accessible your file is, the more secure your file is. And then, like I mentioned earlier, identifying the strengths that are in so many products that exist right now, with some examples of them. Because also, if you are a remediator in the room, knowing what these different products are. I've used all of these different products, so this is not coming from me in terms of representing a company. This is me as an end user, who, before I was with the company I'm with now, I spent 18 years in education and then also in corporate policy writing, but all of it had to do with digital accessibility and the accessibility for the end user. So what are those learnings that we can take from that, and what do you guys bring to the table, because you've had different experience than I do? And then that's where we're getting that sustainable remediation framework, whether you're using templates, high volume work, and then more importantly, how do we move beyond our current standard practice to promote engagement across the field? Because that's when we truly innovate, and when we begin to develop solutions that are as applicable as possible for as many people as possible. So I am not going to give you a dissertation on all of these different laws, standards that exist. We know that legally, proactive digital accessibility compliance is now more important than ever. We have had updated digital accessibility law, especially with e-commerce within the EU. We have updated law in Canada, the United States, God love us. We're always behind the 8 ball, but we even have an updated law in the United States for digital accessibility. We know that there are over 63 different developed nations that have proactive digital accessibility requirements in one or more aspect, either public, private, or both. And so those requirements would encapsulate things like PDF UA, right, if it's a document, but then also how are we merging with that WCAG to ICT standard. So how are we making sure that the document from a structural perspective is accessible, but then also meets those 4 pillars of WCAG? And what sort of tools do we have that can help us identify all of the above, right? Because the document itself is a separate thing from a website, but once you're hosting the document on a website, it's an aspect of web content, which means it now has to meet that bridge standard, that WCAG to ICT standard. So how are we doing that in the most effective way possible? One, because it's a legal compliance issue. 2, because it's also a marketing and branding issue. You're going to reach far more individuals when you have accessible content on the web. There's 2.5 billion people in the world that utilize assistive technology, but there's only 1.2 billion that have disabilities. That's an additional 1.3 billion people that do not identify as having a disability, but use assistive technology. If your assistive technology, which is something even like your cell phone, is going to work, you have to have accessible content. So a third of the world needs accessible content. Or if you're doing it, which is my end goal, because it's the right thing to do, because these are people's lives. So what do we already know? AI remediation is revolutionizing PDF accessibility. What we can do now versus what we could do 5, 10 years ago with AI in terms of automatic coding, even things like providing alternative text, if you use the right AI engine and you give it the right prompting or context, is significant, right? But where are the areas where we know AI is not quite there yet? Role mapping errors, right? Is it a P tag? Is it an H1 tag? Where are we? Where should it be? Inaccurate layout tagging, something that tags a layout as a table when in fact it's a paragraph or a list. Artifact misuse can be common. Language and metadata gaps, right? So the AI is making an assumption about the language and it makes it incorrectly. And now if I'm a screen reader user and my document is in French, but the metadata says that it's in German, then my screen reader is going to read those very French words as though they were very German words, and it's not going to make sense to me. Well, ultimately, do I have access? No, I don't. Some Unicode and coding gaps. And then the tab order versus the structure, right? So as we're thinking through what does the structure look like versus how am I actually navigating the content, because that's not something that always happens accurately when we're using different forms of AI. And that's not pinpointing any one AI over another. These are just common issues that still exist right now, especially in remediation. Well, and what about security? When we are taking a PDF document that perhaps has been digitally signed, and then we need to edit that document and make it accessible, and we're using something like AI as a tool, one, nothing wrong with that, but two, how are we going to ensure that the security in the document remains intact? That we have not jeopardized or in some way corrupted the signature or made it in fact open for additional changes when in fact it was secure before. Knowing that we need the experts to go back in and ensure that things like security flags still permit assistive technology to use the content. So I know that when I've used even Adobe Pro, it's good at when you're locking something, it gives you that option right away, very clearly. Make sure that this remains accessible. Well, are we making sure that that's the case and that it's still usable if we've used a technology that embedded AI or simply another technology? These are things that we have to have humans in the space who know what they're doing to still work with the integrated learning, machine learning, or whatever aspect of AI is being put in there. And then also, obviously, if you have scripts or embedded files, information that is the hidden content that we want to make sure doesn't get removed from security purposes. All of this right now takes human interaction to ensure that it is still intact. So what are the tools that are in practice right now, and what amazing features do they offer? Really, the goal is to capitalize on the strength of the software and then to think from a higher level perspective. Here's where we are now. Where do we need to be and how do we get there? So, and I'm going to give you some examples of some software that I've used that I think has phenomenal features in it. And please note that the examples I'm giving you are not just ones from my company, because I believe that there's some exceptional software out there. Equidox AI is an example, especially for high volume documents, financial statements. Its accuracy is phenomenal, really, when you're using the AI tool for processing things like that. If it's templated documents, really well-made tool. It's cost-effective also because, especially for large organizations, things like banking industries, where you're making the same types of documents. Think about your credit statement or your bank report that you get every month or every few weeks via email. Those are just mass-produced, pushed-out documents, right? There is no human that's stopping to check the accessibility of them. However, tools like this offer a great feature that helps you do it at scale. Important things to know, as with just about every other AI tool, if we're using something with AI only mode, meaning no human interaction, then we might struggle once we have a more complex document, especially something that's going to have far more like complex tables in it, which are always our favorite thing to edit. If you've ever done accessibility remediation on complex tables, you feel my pain. Metadata may or may not be captured accurately. And then there's always those contextual nuances, reasons to double check, right? And I think that's what we see in any software. There is always reasons to double check. But this software, I'm so impressed at how quickly and effectively, with low error report, it does this work. Access Tag AI, so it's usually used within MATLAB, if you're familiar with that program. Very strong on tables. So my STEM content friends, this is an exceptional tool. I come from the higher education world. I'm still a professor at a university in the United States. I teach in a master's and a doctoral program, and I chair dissertations. So when it comes to dissertation research, I am usually far embedded in that, but I require my students to produce only accessible content. So, because that's the kind of mean professor that I am. And I think they need to learn. But this tool especially, incredibly strong on complex tables. Rare to find something like that. Is it perfect? Nothing's perfect. But what I have found, especially when I'm looking at very complex layouts, far more accurate. Even decorative elements, it does a really good job of identifying more accurately what element might be decorative in the document, and kind of taking that minutia work, right? That the work that takes a long time but doesn't require someone who is a PDF expert to do. Really good at that. It's also pretty darn accurate when it comes to metadata pulling. It's actually been cited several times for how well it does, which obviously is a direct map to ISO 14289. Really great tool, especially if you use STEM content. So good to know. Specific characteristics, complicated content, layout of document can obviously affect accuracy. Because at the same time, when we think about, oh, we're using AI and it makes everything so much better, what we stop to realize, or what we sometimes forget to think about, is that it's only as good as what we give it. If we give the software something that is already poorly laid out, which is a content issue that's actually part of the WCAG principles, which would then affect our ability to map to WCAG to ICT, and we're providing it with something that's already not perceivable or already not operable, we are providing it with something that it's not going to be able to give the best readout for because it's already not well designed. And I think that's a feature that we often forget. And then obviously, as with other AIs, despite the high level of automation, we need human verification. So like our keynote was talking about this morning, what's the level of confidence? What's our confidence interval that we have? We need, right now, we are not at a point where we have an AI system that does not depend still on human experts to provide that top level of confidence. So Common Look PDF, another really great tool. And I have a quick video of this. There is no audio, I'm warning you now, so if you think it's broken, it's not. Actually, I don't know if the video will play because we have the PDF version here, but if not, I'll describe it to you. Excellent features, really fast fix for any semantical tagging errors that happen from the AI. Really quick, the tool is fairly user-friendly in that way. So if the AI goes in and tags and you find that the tagging has a few errors in it, right? It's AI, there are going to be some errors. Really quick to fix those, and also fairly intuitive in terms of changing leveling or how you can view in comparison to your document. It reviews the accessibility, so it has a checker built in that reviews against PDF UA, some aspects of WCAG, and a few other standards as well. Not something that every tool has built within it already. It also has a great table linearization feature. So all of those ridiculous layout tables that people create because they want it to look a certain way that in fact are not a data table and will never be a data table, very easy to use linearization for those types of tables, which makes the editing so much faster. And again, good to know things, it's not meant to be an OCR software, not the purpose. So it doesn't provide OCR, which means you're going to need an additional software that is going to provide you an OCR document before you can then utilize it within the software. Not a bad thing, it's just not what it's meant to do. You do use this with Adobe Pro, so it's an add-on tool. And then obviously, especially with a tool that has so many features in it, training is really important. This is not an out-of-the-box tool. This is something that having the training on is vitally important to your success in using it. And I don't know. No. All right, so there are videos. However, instead of showing them, because the only thing we have here is the PDF version of this, this is a screenshot of exactly what it looks like if you were to use the Common Look tool. And what's happened here, and I'll describe it to you because the tags tree is quite small, even for me to read from all the way up here. It's been auto-tagged. And what should be your H1, that the annual Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday Rock on DC Music Festival, which sounds like a great festival that I'd actually like to attend, has been tagged as 2 P tags. Obviously, we need an H1 tag. Very, common occurrence. And then what the video would have shown you is how you can really easily select that section, use their insert tag feature, simply click on the H1, and then use their promotion tool to move it out so that you can remove what is now an empty P tag. They do it in the video. It's done in seconds, which is phenomenal. Especially if you're thinking this document, imagine this was a 47-page document, and you need to go through to find any other instances like that as you're double-checking what the AI has put out. Adobe has the Make Accessible feature, right? The AI feature that's built in. Auto-tagging, like the Common Look tool, like some of the other tools we've looked at, it does do OCR scanning. So far, that's the only one, right? But that's what its purpose is. It has many different levels of functionality. It has an accessibility checker, circa 2013. And then it has the tool that I think I use the most in Adobe is the Preflight. For things like font embedding and those sorts of really quick accessibility features that if I had to do it from a coding perspective or from a tagging perspective, it would take me far longer than I have patience for. With the accessibility checker that's in Adobe, it's helpful to know that it's circa 2013, which simply means that it doesn't map to all the content or all the aspects of PDF UA. We won't meet all 114 of them. So that's not necessarily a poor thing. It's simply knowing if this is the tool I'm using, what other tools do I need to use in collaboration so that I can have a final output product that actually meets the standard from a legal perspective, from a usability perspective, or from a marketing perspective, or all of the above, right? You need human oversight. And then the auto tagging feature, it groups tags, puts them in different groups tags into divs or whatever. Most of the time that's accurate. Sometimes it's really not, so you have to be careful to know and expand them as you go through the editing. Grackle PDF is another PDF editor. Its AI is machine learning for the layout detection. Then there is human intervention before tagging happens. So to correct any layout issues, then there is an auto tag feature. There's also different wizards that help with fast editing that employ automation but that have to be human controlled. So there is, again, that human element throughout the process. The accessibility checker, like Common Looks, it checks against PDF UA, various aspects of WCAG for WCAG to ICT, and it uses the Matterhorn protocol in this case. And it has a screen reader preview, so does Common Looks. Have a screen reader preview, which is another really helpful from a usability standpoint. You want to use something that's going to give you that output. Because you could meet something from a technical perspective, you could meet the standard, that doesn't mean it's going to be usable. Because depending on how it's mapped and how that AI has mapped it back, or even how the human has mapped it back to the appropriate standard, that doesn't mean that it's always done accurately. So when you have a glimpse into what the experience of an end user may be, your ability to turn out excellent content, not just content that checks a box, is exceptionally higher. Things that are good to know. This also not an OCR software. So you would need something else to OCR the content first in order to utilize it. Another one where there's so many features, you will not be successful if you don't have training. Some of the features are in beta, so that's helpful to know too, right? There are so many things that are constantly being created and added to. I'm sure all of you, if any of you work in any of these similar companies or even in your related fields, you're constantly adding and developing and growing. And then there have been improvements made, but more improvements could be made in terms of layout detection and accuracy. Because the more accurate that is, then the less human fixing has to go in before the auto tagging happens. And another video that I will give you just a general gist of. So this is the screenshot from the software. And this is before any tagging were to happen. So what the video would show is the auto tag feature, how you could go in and easily fix something, their auto layout feature, how you can go in and easily identify something that's been, that the AI learning tool has identified as something that might be incorrect, right? It's a paragraph, but it says it's a table, for example. How you quickly, with a click, fix it, how it auto tags, and then how to utilize some of the tools within it. Similar, it has a table wizard that will also linearize tables, will allow you to edit very complex tables quickly. So for that like more intrusive editing needs when you have high level content, something that can be really helpful. So what's an example of something that, what would it look like if something says it's accessible, but in fact doesn't meet all the time? So semantic tagging is an easy one, right? Oh, this is identified as a P tag, or perhaps all the way through everything that's text is listed as a P tag. Or worse, it's listed as something else entirely, or a span. I hate that. Or like the 47 spans because they wanted white space between one section and another, so they decided to hit it 47 times. And then if your screen reader reads it out loud, it's going to say 47 times, span blank, span blank. Imagine how annoying that is if you're the final end user. But it happens, right? The semantic tagging, not always perfect. That, one, goes against ISO standard, so something we have to take really seriously. Errors in complex tagging, especially images that contain text, can be really difficult. It has the image, but then the text is perhaps superimposed over the image. So does it tag it as text and image? Does it skip the text altogether? Does it skip the image altogether and tag partial text? I've seen all of the above happen with different tools and different models. But things that a human still needs to be involved to identify. And then the tendency to apply also like a flat, like just saying everything's an H1. Or maybe not even identifying what level of heading is just H for everything that it thinks is a heading. Well, is it a heading? It's probably accurate, it's a heading, but does that still require additional human work to go in and identify, well, what levels are these headings? How easy does the tool make it to do that? Can you see all the headings in one place? Can you pull them out? How can we make it better? And then really building a sustainable creation and remediation framework, which is where I want to go with this, right? How can we go from where we are right now, using some features of automation, and make it better? Right now, this is usually what's going on. We have some form of AI automation, either bulk auto tagging, some item detection, and then all the tagging happens, and then it goes to the human expert to go in and make any fixes, or if it's a complex document, to then go in and do the complex editing. And then you run it through validation at the end, right? Okay, does it run through my validator tool? What does this look like? What kind of percentage of accuracy am I receiving? This is kind of where we are right now in terms of the very high level process. Well, what if we started in our first plane, that AI automation, bulk auto tagging, but we were able to review something like, and this is, mind you, this is not the answer, this is a perspective, because I'd love to know what your perspectives are. What if we were able to review the layout before any tags happened, right? So we don't have anything to fix yet, because it hasn't been tagged, but we could review and edit layout. Perhaps we can, how do we utilize templating in that phase of the journey? Before we have anything that's finalized, where does that templating and streaming get built into a system? And then addressing any source access issues. So what are we doing proactively? If we have access to the humans that are creating the source content, what are we doing proactively to help ensure that they are informed enough to give us something that's at least more accessible than not? Then we move on to this human expert part that's from our standard process. Well, if that human expert is utilizing tools that allow for, in one way or another, guided automation. If it's guided automation, what does that require? It requires checking accessibility throughout the process, not at the end of the process. Because otherwise, what will be your guide if it's not the actual standard that you have to meet? It involves, how do we improve the efficiency of the human expert? How do we increase productivity and decrease cost? Because that's the other huge thing. It's expensive if you are outsourcing documents for remediation. That's why so many people want software. They want to figure out how to do it internally because that's what they have the finances for, and they're hoping that they have the human resources for. However, human resources only go but so far when you have an exponential amount of fixing to do, right? So how can we make it as efficient as possible, which then drives up the use? And then in terms of validation, what validator are we using? Are we using something that we know is a tested validator that's going to validate against the principles that we have to meet within our country's legal requirement, if we have one, within our contractor's legal requirement, if we are the contractor and we're providing something back to a different company, no matter what country it's in? Are we using the standard that's going to be the most accurate from a business perspective to increase our reach? What are we conceptualizing when we're doing that? And for the most part, those are the accessibility standards. And then obviously validating throughout the process instead of waiting until we are at the end of the process, or doing it once at the beginning and then once again at the end. In hopes that we've fixed all the problems by the time we get there. So this is one step up, right? Next level AI, how could we approach this? What checkers are you using? Everyone's probably familiar with PAC. I love the PAC checker. One thing I really love about PAC is that it has a screen reader preview. I think that's fantastic. It identifies the errors of where you can find them. It does map to PDF UA. It does map to aspects of WCAG. It provides an accessibility report, all things that you want to look for, especially if you need to provide evidence that you have provided to a client an accessible piece of material. So it is, as most of you know, if you've ever used PAC, it's a PC-based, it's machine-based, so it has to be on your local machine, works in the Windows environment. There are other checkers. Grackle has a checker. It's web-based, which means it is an accessibility checker for PDF that you can use with Mac or Windows or Linux or whatever you'd like to run it with. And in other ways, it does the same thing that PAC does, slightly differently, but it's going against PDF UA, aspects of WCAG. They are both free tools. There are other tools that exist that check PDF compliance. And if you're using a different tool, my encouragement for you is check to make sure that it's mapping against those things and how accurate the mapping is. Is there any research that shows the accuracy of the report data that's coming out of that tool? So we want to address access at the source. So it's making it strategic and sustainable. That's what we've been talking about, right? How do we do that? Whether it's implementing basic training for our source content creators. And many times when we're on the remediation side, we don't stop to think, hey, how could I make this easier before I ever get the content? And what sort of training would that look like? And how do we facilitate that, or at least encourage its use, right? It reduces the edit time. The cost of training is usually significantly less than the cost of paying humans substantially more money for more time to edit or to have to outsource, or the risk of non-compliance. What's your risk assessment, whether you're providing that for a client or for yourself, in terms of then toting that what you have is accessible. From a legal perspective, what's the risk? From a usability perspective, what's the risk? Many times it's not something we want to have to deal with. So How do we also better address the WCAG to ICT standard in the source document? Because we know WCAG to ICT, those principles of WCAG have much more to do with the content than the structure, right? WCAG is content. So how are we addressing those things that can't, right now at least, be identified and addressed in PDF? So things like the use of straightforward and easy, plain language to understand. Are we using 3 paragraphs when 3 bullet points would do? How is our color contrast? Is it actually findable, everything in here? Once I find it, can I use it? Can I fill out the form field? I found it. Can I actually get my cursor in it and get it to work and type my name? Right? It's important. How do we build that in to what we're doing right now? Because ultimately, if we have a PDF, there's a good chance it's going to be sent by email. There's a better chance it's going to go online somewhere. And if we're providing content that meets PDF UA, but has not been thought through the WCAG perspective, it is fundamentally impossible for a document to be WCAG compliant. Let me say that again. It is fundamentally impossible for a document to be WCAG compliant. WCAG is a standard for websites and apps. A document has a beginning and an end. It is not one of those things. However, if we have a document that is PDF UA compliant, but we have not considered the principles of WCAG and we're providing it back, let's say, to a client or for our own usage, and we're putting it on our website without taking into consideration those complex overlays that are there, like how does that mesh with one another, then we actually may be putting inaccessible content online that would still make us liable or still make it unusable for our end user. Really important things that we have to still be thinking about. That's our next phase. How do we do that? Utilizing templating when appropriate. There are so many great like streaming tools. Common Look has one, Grackle has one. I'm sure there are many others that have them where you can stream if you have a known output, right? You have a templated content like those bank statements I was mentioning earlier, where you can stream it through some great tools that will then output automatically an accessible PDF that is still automatically within that company's process sent to their end user. It's amazing, right? How do we do that? How do we implement that in everything else? If we have high volume talks, I've talked about some of this, right? Like how are we using a template? How are we using things that are going to lower the amount of work? Because if you think about it, how many high volume things are created? Millions. One company might make millions of documents in a day and send them out to individuals. Well, that's millions of documents that have a questionable level of accessibility, a questionable level of compliance, and a questionable level of usability. They don't always stop to think about it that way, but it actually matters. Automated document streaming even, how do we check what we already have online? And then how could we integrate that into an editing or remediation process? Right? These are higher level thought process things. They're being worked on, but oftentimes in siloed ways. What would it be like if we actually worked together, even from a higher level conceptual perspective? Where the experts are definitely still needed right now, where we are in automation, STEM content, mathematical, chemical notation, STEM diagrams. There was a poster session about then someone was across the room and we were at our poster, so I didn't get a chance to walk over. But the whole point was, how do we develop a way to code or make things like equations in PDF accessible so that we're not only dependent upon alternative text to explain the equation? Talk about game changing. As a professor, let me tell you, that would be phenomenal. It's there, right? We can do it, but nobody does.
No, LaTeX does it, and that means a large proportion of the STEM world will have it.
Yeah.
Soon. Yeah, well,
Right.
I mean, the old documents still need to be worked.
Right. And that's usually the harder part, right? Finding all the things that need remediation after the fact. But huge, right? The fact that that's available if they're using the tool. So things like documents with multiple languages in it. We need a human to help ensure those things. Interactive forms, obviously tables. And then what sort of proactive measures, things like automating metadata injection, how do we control that so that it's accurate? Templating, creating that like source guidance, using linting scripts to automatically detect and flag common structural or like anti-patterns before a document is passed to the human. How can we do those things? A lot of companies are doing things like this, right? Or we have certain aspects coming from different areas. This is not to say that no one's ever thought of this before. But what would it be like if we were thinking about it in a collaborative space? Really, because the experts are in the room right now, today, here. All of you are the experts. You're here from different companies. You're here from different user cases. You have different levels of experience. You come from different levels of tech, right? Some of you are developers, I'm sure. Some of you come from different aspects. I am not a developer, so I am not the one. I know enough coding to be very dangerous, and that's where I would leave it. So very, very dangerous. All right, God, from the front row. Oh, AI will do the rest. No, he wasn't listening. He's also my boss, so I can say that. What would it be like if we collaborated? How can we advance access and better support human rights? So I've covered a bunch of things, right? Different features, things that are exceptional, and a lot of different softwares that are out here today. From you guys in the room, what are your thoughts? Where do you see this going? What do you see as being the next thing that we really need to address that would affect the use or affect the reach or affect the access, because that's why we're here, that's why we're talking about this, for individuals all over the world as a human rights issue? Any thoughts? I am literally opening up. I would love to hear, and I'm going to bring to be accessible, I'm going to bring you the microphone so everyone can hear.
That's very nice. Thank you. I think one of the most important parts from the PDF perspective is that we actually embrace, finally, PDF2 and UA2, because except for simple novels, UA1, which unfortunately, for example, PAC is what is actually being checked on, is not suitable. And this is the problem why all the complex documents have problems. But we have the tools, no, we have the standards, and the tools need to follow. And we have still very shaky support in tools for doing PDF2, which we are now challenging from the LaTeX project, because we are producing now PDF2 and UA2 en masse, I would say, in a small space, but still largely. And I hope that the industry is following and supporting PDF2 properly in the sense of actually being there.
I think that's an excellent point. Anyone else? I will be the professor and walk around the room.
I think one of the things that could help quite a bit in this area is to think about situational accessibility, because that is something that involves every single person in this room. What happens if I only have access to my phone while I'm driving a car? Not a good thing. But if I interacted with voice and could handle commands that way, that would be useful, right? That requires that the PDF itself is accessible in a form that can be consumed. And you know, it's not just that. It could be you're on the subway. It's hard to hear. It's hard to focus on your phone because you're moving about. And that's sort of what I've been trying to focus my company on, Adobe, trying to get them to understand. Is it's not just about, you know. And I'm actually surprised the number was so big. I would love to see the references. Perfect.
I have references, don't worry. And even to that point, I think that's an excellent point. You know, if you are somewhere and perhaps you don't have access to a good Wi-Fi signal or good internet, or where you are, you're in a coffee shop, right? And so you're dependent upon their broadband signal, and you don't have to have a disability at all. Where's the next hand? Are you pointing at one?
No, that's one that you said.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Duff, I didn't mean to walk away from you. So let's say you're somewhere you don't have that great of a signal and you really need to load this content, but the content has images in it. So what do? Big box with an X in it. If that document was made accessibly, that image's alt text will show anyway. You don't have to have a disability to benefit from having alt text.
Sure, just make it easier.
So I had a question pertaining to your discussion regarding AI. One of the things that I would like to see more of, and I will admit to not being up to date on the latest generation of tools. Nobody should expect that of me, and sometimes they do, but I'm not. But is to see AI being put to more use in assisting validators in bringing the user's attention and frankly the author's attention to questionable semantics, right? So a lot of UA involves what we call human checks, but a lot of validation software, for very understandable reasons, because software needs something to go ahead and measure, will tend to favor or focus even on machine-based checks. So there are the human checks are equally important, or if not, it's not much purpose in arguing about which is more or less important. But one thing I would like to see is more energy put to putting AI to use in presenting perhaps a representation of the document to the user and allowing them to make sure that these semantic representations seem to be accurate.
I like that. That's a different perspective on the other ways you could apply AI. Anyone else? Thoughts about it? Whether you have a solution for it or not, even just something you think somewhere we need to be that we're not there yet as an industry or as a field. I'm not the professor that calls on people, so it's okay.
Comments? Any other questions? You did my job here.
I have a few more slides for you that we'll get to. But I was like, oh, we have one in the back. Yes.
Okay. I have one question. You mentioned this tool called Access Tag to analyze tables, which is a part of any project. What kind of import format does this AI need? Do you hand over the image or the PDF? I know passing images to an AI to get an
If it's
or recognition.
So the question is, what version or what source document or source are you providing to the AI so that it's going to then extract the data or implement the correct tagging for the table that's there? I mean, I think it's one, depending on what software you're using, it may be different. Usually you're putting the document itself, hopefully, from an Excel or from an actual table, not an image of a table, but an actual table, into your document that then becomes a PDF. Because it's going to then bring over as much structural semantics to help with the coding as possible when you're doing it that way. If you're bringing an image of something over, you've brought an image of something over, and then you're really depending on the AI to be able to pick apart that image, identify that it's a table, and then go the next step of, especially if it's a complex table, where those different header rows scope to and how that works. But you don't always, I think more to the point that you're making, what happens when you don't have control over what the user provides you? And then how do we, handle the accuracy?
Okay, my question was quite simple. Do you post an image or not?
I would say you use not the image. Preferably you would post what's coming from the actual table source as opposed to an image of the table. Anyone else? Jeffrey.
Go closer.
In your presentation, you brought one example of kind of documents which has to be reprocessed to make it accessible, like, for example, invoices. In my point of view, it's very frustrating that we have to talk in 2025 still about having to post-process highly structured documents like invoices afterwards, after they get generated by the generating systems. Do you see a trend in this area that's
there are
systems
that embed in the system so that what you get from the output is an accessible, invoice, for example. Where because they're so structured and they're so templated, right? There are tools that will build into that integration almost in a streaming model, where it integrates into the tool that's creating the invoice. It feeds it through that model because it already has the template, so it feeds it through, and then it generates the PDF, but in an accessible way because it has all the data from what the template holds.
Just
So
to
it
add
is
to that,
feasible.
the great thing about PDFs is that anyone can make one.
Yeah.
The bad thing about PDFs is anyone can make one. And you've still got the same now. I started my professional life back in a long time ago on composition software that was creating PDF at PCL and Post. I'm not loud enough for you. Thanks. And creating that sort of stuff, and it kind of moved into accessible. But even now, those giants are still out there, and they're just legacy software. OpenText own a whole host of them that create that sort of stuff. And they've kind of added stuff in at the back end, but that's kind of where it is. I think the general trend is, yes, a lot more systems, especially when they're making en masse, do have accessibility stuff in there. But there's tens of hundreds of pieces of software out there that just don't do it, and never will, because they don't think about it. Just going back to your other question, I think the thing I'd like to see is the software turn into more of a reader aspect, a bit like Adobe Reader is now, and the reader fires up, you open up a PDF in it, doesn't matter what it is, and it becomes a conversational document. No one wants a document read to them. I mean, I don't look at a document and read it from top to finish. If I've got an invoice, I want to see how much I owe someone, or who I owed it to, or who I paid it to. So realistically, if I'm going to put my shoes into someone who's not sighted, I want to ask a document, who do I owe the money to? And it tells me. That's it. So I think that's the next step we've got to get to. Once we get past this fun bit of AI we're working on now, you want to, and not even just a document. Here's a list of all my documents. You've got a little repository on your laptop of my documents. Go and tell me what I owe Joe Blogs, or go and tell me when the window cleaner's coming, and it's just conversational. So I think that's where we've got to get to.
Is that a document? I'm not coming up with the right. Is that at the document side though, or at that point at the processor side?
Yeah, well, I think what we've got at the moment it's a bit of both, isn't it? I think that what what will make it easier is if the documents fed in to start with are accessible, because everyone works with it much easier then. But I think what we'll have is the processor as well to kind of get us over the gaps that are going to still be there. But I think that's where it's got to go, for that to be a nice piece of kit to use. I don't know how we do it. I'm not the techie in the room, I must admit. Herm is.
There's a processor.
We'll do it via XBRL. Hey, Herm.
Well, no, I was just going to say, in the last talk, Duff mentioned something about we need to get into semantic modeling standards, whatever the acronym is for it. It's not just a template, it's a template that has semantics. There's 10 million invoices, but the semantics of what a line item is on the invoice are consistent and have to be recognizable. Yes. And I think that's far more important than knowing that you have a screen reader that gives you some gobbledygook in a language.
Well, it's going to be actually useful with your screen reader at the end of the day.
If you have some slides, then
I know we are at time.
I thought this was the end, but if you
Well, here, what I'm going to do is skip to just as a takeaway, just from yep, this is what it is. So as a takeaway, some of the 10 things that right now seem to still be really important for humans when they're editing a PDF document are these 10 different areas, because they're the areas that if we've implemented AI in one way or another, or frankly, even if we haven't, and we're working with a document that has some semblance of a tag structure, these are areas, like obviously coherent, correct reading order, the semantic and sequential headings, list properties, tables. Many of these things are your common, right? They're your pillars of access in a PDF. They're your pillars of structure in a PDF, whether you're talking about it from an access perspective or not. But these are still the areas where we are. So I guess my challenge is, how can we think about where we are in terms of what we still need to do as humans in the editing process and turn it on its head? How can we, and I think we had some great ideas even in here, how do we change how we use AI, perhaps? How do we change what the model looks like when we embed different types of coding for a streaming process? And I think the conversation is really exciting, but I think we get there much faster if we work together than we do if we work apart. Because at the end, what matters is that people have access. And that's it. Thank you so much. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, that's the QR code.